You were told this job was flexible, that you could log in when you wanted, log out when you were tired, work on your own terms. You believed flexibility meant control, that choosing your hours meant choosing your life. But if flexibility were real, your income wouldn't rise and fall without warning. If flexibility were real, the busiest hours wouldn't be decided for you. And if flexibility were real, you wouldn't feel pressured to drive right now just because the app says demand is high. You don't feel owned, you don't feel forced, you just feel nudged. Again, and again, and again. And that's the detail most people miss. Because the most effective control systems don't feel like control at all. What if flexibility was never about freedom, but about compliance you don't notice? On the surface, this looks like modern work done right. No boss watching the clock, no schedule pinned to a wall, no manager telling you when to show up. Just an app, a map, and the promise that you decide. That promise is powerful. Because for most people, flexibility isn't about comfort. It's about dignity. It means fitting work around family, around health, around life. So when a platform offers flexibility, it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like relief. But relief can hide structure. Because even without a boss, someone still decides where demand exists. Someone still decides when work is worth it. And someone still decides how much effort is rewarded. That someone isn't a person. It's a system. A system that doesn't tell you what to do. It simply makes some choices expensive and others unavoidable. You're free to ignore it. But ignoring it costs you money. And that's the quiet trade being made. If no one gives orders, who exactly is shaping your decisions every time you drive? At some point, most drivers reach the same conclusion. If I'm flexible, I'll work more when it pays more. I'll just follow the best times. That's how flexibility turns into income. That belief sounds logical. It feels smart, almost strategic. But watch what actually happens. The app doesn't reward flexibility. It trains response. Surge appears. Notifications light up. Maps glow red. You feel opportunity, but thousands of other drivers feel it too. So you move? Not because you chose the time, because the system chose it for you. When too many drivers arrive, pay drops. When too few arrive, pressure rises. The system oscillates demand until behavior stabilizes. Over time, patterns form. You start driving at the same hours, chasing the same signals, avoiding the same dead zones, not because you were told to. Because deviation costs you money. This is the belief that breaks. Flexibility doesn't mean freedom. It means availability. You are flexible only inside the boundaries the platform sets. And the more flexible you become, the more predictable your behavior gets. That predictability is valuable, not to you. To the system coordinating millions of drivers at once. It learns faster than any human manager. It measures hesitation. It measures patience. It measures desperation. Every tap feeds feedback. Every ignored request recalibrates pressure. Every accepted ride sharpens the model. Eventually, flexibility flips. You stop asking when you want to work. You ask when the system will reward you for showing up. And that question changes everything. Because once incentives lead, choice follows. What looks optional becomes necessary. What feels flexible becomes narrow. And the job quietly reshapes your time around its needs. By the time you notice, your schedule already belongs to the pattern you've been trained to follow. Not to you, to the system itself. Always watching. What happens when predictability becomes the real product being sold? This is where discomfort sets in. Because if flexibility isn't freedom, then what is it actually giving you? You still choose when to log in. That part is real, but choice without leverage isn't power. It's exposure. The system doesn't need to force you. It just needs to make some hours expensive to ignore. Bills don't wait. Rent doesn't reschedule. So when demand spikes, pressure spikes with it. You feel it as urgency. A sense that now is the right time. Not for you, for the platform. Miss too many high-demand windows and income slips. Chase them constantly, and exhaustion builds. Either way, the cost is carried by you. And slowly, a quiet fear forms. If I don't stay responsive, I fall behind. If I don't adapt, I lose ground. That fear doesn't come from a manager. It comes from math. Ratings, acceptance rates, earnings per hour. Numbers that look neutral, but behave like boundaries. You begin optimizing yourself. Driving longer, waiting less, resting later, not because someone asked you to, because the system rewards endurance and punishes hesitation. This is the mirror moment where autonomy starts to feel conditional. You can still choose, but only between options that preserve the system's balance. And when flexibility depends on constant availability, it stops being a benefit. It becomes a requirement. If flexibility has conditions, who actually carries the risk when demand disappears? Here is the rule most people never see. The platform doesn't sell rides. It sells balance. Its real job is not to maximize your income. It's to stabilize supply and demand at scale. To do that, it must solve one problem continuously. Too many drivers waste money. Too few drivers lose customers. So the system constantly nudges behavior toward equilibrium. When demand spikes, incentives rise just enough to pull drivers in. When supply floods, incentives fade quietly. No announcement, no explanation, just less reward for the same effort. This is why flexibility feels inconsistent, because consistency would break the system. If everyone earned predictably, drivers would cluster permanently. Costs would rise. Efficiency would fall. So variability isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Income volatility trains responsiveness. Uncertainty keeps drivers attentive. Ambiguity prevents coordination. And the risk? It never sits with the platform. Fuel costs are yours. Maintenance is yours. Idle time is yours. The system absorbs none of it. It simply reallocates attention. This is the turning point. Flexibility exists so risk can be outsourced invisibly. You carry uncertainty. The platform carries optimization. And once you see that, the promise of flexibility changes shape. It was never about letting you work when you want. It was about making sure someone is always available. The system doesn't need loyalty. It needs elasticity. And elasticity only works when pressure flows downward. If flexibility shifts risk onto you, what does the platform keep for itself? This doesn't mean the platform is evil. It means it's optimized. Systems don't have morals, they have incentives. And the incentive here is simple. Control variability without owning labor. That's the real lesson. Flexibility without ownership always favors the system, because ownership absorbs risk. Access transfers it. When you don't own demand, you respond to it. When you don't own pricing, you accept it. The job feels flexible because there is no clock, but time is still being managed, just indirectly. So the question isn't whether flexibility exists. It's who benefits from it. If flexibility improves your leverage, it's freedom. If it improves someone else's efficiency, it's control. Understanding that difference changes how you see work and how you evaluate opportunity. Not all freedom is symmetrical. Some versions only work one way. The moment flexibility stops improving your position, it stops being a benefit. It becomes exposure disguised as choice. Clarity comes from seeing the structure, not reacting to it. Once you understand where control lives, you stop mistaking access for power. And that's the insight most people never get. Because it doesn't feel like control. It feels like convenience. If platforms define flexibility this way, what does work look like next? This model isn't unique to one company. It's becoming the default shape of modern work. Platforms don't replace managers. They replace responsibility. They remove schedules, offices, and supervisors, but keep coordination, optimization, and pressure. To the outside world, that looks like progress. Work without bosses. Jobs without constraints. But under the surface, the constraint simply moved. From people to systems. Once flexibility is defined by algorithms, it scales perfectly. But it also hardens. Because systems don't negotiate. They don't recognize exhaustion. They don't adjust for context. They respond to patterns. That's why this model spreads so easily. Food delivery, freelance marketplaces, content platforms, even finance. Anywhere access replaces ownership, risk flows downward. The promise sounds familiar every time. Work when you want. Earn on your terms. Be your own boss. But the outcome keeps repeating. More responsiveness required, more volatility absorbed, less leverage gained. This is the world taking shape. Not fewer jobs, different power structures. And understanding that shift matters. Because once platforms define flexibility, workers are measured by availability, not autonomy. Seeing that clearly is the first step toward deciding what kind of work actually improves your position instead of just filling your time. If flexibility is being redefined everywhere, what choice do you really have? This episode isn't about quitting, and it isn't about judgment. It's about understanding the rules before you mistake access for advantage. When you see how flexibility is structured, you stop blaming yourself for outcomes you don't control, and you stop confusing convenience with power. That clarity changes how you choose work, how you manage time, how you evaluate opportunity. At RINH Wealth, that's the goal. Not to tell you what to do, but to show you how systems really operate. Because once you understand where control lives, you can decide whether a system serves you or simply uses your availability to serve itself. And that awareness is where real autonomy begins. What other flexible systems are quietly shaping your life right now?